First, please let me apologize for any background noise you might hear. There is some kind of party slash like murder scene going on outside. I don't know what it is. I hear a lot of screaming, so I apologize if you hear that also. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Raquel and I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. I had a really good reading month. I'm totally in my fantasy era and I'm just having such a great time. I read 8 books this month, so that's pretty good, especially since some of these are huge, like chunky books. So I started this month off pretty strong and I finished up Chain of Iron, which is the second book in the Last Hour series of the Shadowhunter universe by Cassandra Clare. I read the first book a few months ago and didn't love it and I was really hesitant to continue, but I actually really liked this one and I was so much more interested in the plot and the romance and everything. It's such a good series, like for a YA, like fantasy series, and like I love this setting in these. Like this is, I believe, Edwardian London. It takes place in the very early 1900s and just love that. This was actually really good. I rated it a 4.25 star. The next couple of books that I'm going to talk about, I did a fantasy reading vlog, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, you can go check out that video. So I'm going to talk about these very briefly. But the next book that I read was A Court of Silver Flames. This is the last book currently out in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and this series follows Nesta and Cassian as opposed to Feyre and Rhysand from their previous books. I liked this. I had a very good time reading it, but I definitely didn't love that it's super crazy long unnecessarily. There was actually a little too much spice in this, believe it or not. And the plot didn't really move that fast. There was actually a lot of nothing going on. Like, I think they focused more on Nesta's character development than they really focused on any sort of plot. I feel like the moments that we did get plot and that we did have action were great. I mean, true Sarah J Maas fashion, the last 100 pages were immaculate and I loved that. But overall, I don't feel like this really stood up to the rest of the series, so I ended up giving it a 4 stars. The next book that I read in that vlog was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I really liked reading this. I thought it was so sweet, but it is marketed as a fantasy romance, and while it does have some fantasy in it, it definitely just felt like a historical fiction romance kind of book, heavily focused on war, which felt like World War I, with like a little bit of magic, mostly like talked about. There's not a whole lot of magic that you actually see in the book other than the magic typewriters. But essentially you just have Iris and Roman who are rival journalists that are both competing for the same position at work, to be a columnist. Meanwhile, Iris's brother has gone to fight in the war for one of the warring gods, and she hasn't heard from him a long time, and she starts writing him letters even though she has no idea where he is to send them. And somehow somebody starts writing her back. And I don't really think this is a spoiler, but we learned pretty early on that Roman, her rival at work, is actually the guy that is responding to her letters. He knows that it's her, but she doesn't know that it's him. And so they have like this friendship that develops through these letters and maybe a little bit more. And it's just really cute. The romance is really, really, really cute in this. I just think I was expecting something a little different. And so I don't know, I think I was a little bit shocked to see that it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but I did enjoy it. I am definitely open to reading the next one because the ending was really crazy in this, and I settled on a 4 stars for this. The last book that I read in that reading vlog was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I love this series. It is exactly what you've probably heard. It is Hunger Games meets Underworld, vampires. It's so good. I think the world is so like rich in like politics and history, and there's like a lot to this world, and I loved the characters. The slow burn romance was like perfect, like so good. And I love that all the trials in here, everything was just really good, and I rated this 5 stars. I'm actually currently reading a little novella in between the first and second book and loving that just as much, but I'll tell you about that next month. But anyway, super good, love this. And the last physical book that I read this year was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This book is about Florence. Her family owns a funeral home, and she kind of has grown up around this funeral home, grown up around death, and she happens to be able to speak to ghosts just like her dad. And when she became an adult, she ended up moving to New York City because when you can speak to ghosts, people tend to not believe you. And she kind of had like this kind of negative reputation around town. People made fun of her, people don't believe her about being able to speak to ghosts, and she just kind of had to get away from there and move to New York. became a ghostwriter for a really famous author. But then tragedy strikes and she has to go back to her hometown for a little while. And then she sees the ghost of a person that she knows in life, and is pretty shocked to see this person as a ghost. And they end up kind of helping each other work out some things, and she kind of ends up falling in love with this ghost. It definitely felt more like rom-com-y. I was kind of expecting it to be like a little bit more emotional, and especially with the topic of grief that comes up a lot. But it was definitely a little bit more like lighthearted and rom-com than I was expecting. Rom-coms are usually never going to be my absolute favorite books in the world. Like, I really want to feel something when I read a book, and rom-coms are fun and they totally have their place. I don't think I was really expecting that from this book, but overall still very good. And I gave it a 4 stars. Okay, and then for audiobooks, I actually listened to Chain of Iron on audio. I don't know if I told you that, but I ended up listening to that on audio. I didn't actually end up reading the physical copy of that. But the next audiobook that I listened to, Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. You guys, this is fall in the pages of a book. It is so good. I loved it. I know I actually spoke about this a little bit earlier when I did my like fall recommendations, but this book is so good. I don't really want to tell you too much. I just want to tell you like what to expect. It is a kind of misty, eerie, like island in the Pacific Northwest. There's a murder mystery. The whole thing takes place on like an apple orchard. They talk about the falling leaves. They talk about the magic. The main character actually works in a tea shop that does like tea leaf readings. And there's a really good like kind of heartbreaking romance. I don't know, this had everything you want in fall for me personally. I loved this book and I rated it 5 stars. The next book that I read on audio was Good Girl, Bad Blood. That is the second book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. I am loving these like YA mysteries. They are so good. And honestly, if I have to be real, like I haven't read like a ton of thrillers, but these are some of my favorite ones that I've ever read. I feel like I always settle between a 3 and a 4 for thrillers because, you know, they're usually not super emotional. There's usually not a whole lot of romance. There's nothing keeping me super into it until the end when you get the twist, and like that's the good part. But with the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series so far, like I'm loving the whole thing. Like I'm enjoying every single minute of it. And I really like this. I can't exactly remember my rating, but I'm pretty sure I went with like a 4 star for this, maybe a 4.25, but I actually like had such a good time with this. And the last book that I listened to on audio was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This was a book picked by my book club this month, and this is an interesting one. I still don't really know how I feel about it, but this book is about a girl, I think we don't even ever get to know her name. I'm just gonna call her the narrator. The narrator who is in this underground bunker with like 40 other women. They're locked there and they're kept there by these guards. And the narrator has lived there pretty much all her life. She has no memory of life before the bunker. And she lives with some older women who do remember what life was like before the bunker, but they have no idea where they are or why they were taken or like what's going on. And they've, you know, we assume that the narrator is like around 16 or so, maybe 15, 16. It's what I kind of was guessing. She doesn't know either. No one really knows because there's like no way to measure time. I think if you have any interest in this book, I want you to know, don't go into this thinking it's just going to be this awesome like dystopian plot, or you're going to get this really satisfying ending, or you're going to get all of your questions answered, because you're not going to get that in this book. That's not what this book is. And I can see how that can be really frustrating because I was frustrated with it. I had so many questions that I never got any answers to. I wanted there to be like this like crazy plot, you know, like a really awesome dystopian novel. And the author's purpose was obviously not to make this like a really cool plot book. The purpose of the author's writing, in my opinion, was just to like highlight what makes us human, and taking away the things that we do in life for enjoyment, like art and reading and having a purpose or a career or a family or a relationship or friends, like, you know, taking away a lot of those things, like, does that strip us of our humanity, and like, what do we become after that? And then like also if there's really no society, like how do we determine right and wrong? Are we born with that idea? Are we born with knowing what's right and wrong? Is there some sort of human thing in our DNA that tells us that? Or do we kind of have to learn it from society? Like what part of us comes from society and the way that things are? And then what part of us is human because that's how we are as species? And I thought it was a really thought-provoking book, but again, like, don't expect to learn anything or find out anything because you don't. But I did end up liking it, like taking that into consideration, like forget like what you want the book to be and then judge the book based on what it is. And I did think it was very thought-provoking, and I ended up settling on a 3.5 star for this book. That is it for this reading wrap up. I had such a good reading month that I'm super excited for October because it's like officially spooky season. Like I've already started, but like now all of my like real like witchy like spooky books are like in play, and I'm like super excited about it. I can't wait. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Thanks. Bye.